and welcome to the very first episode of Chintan Speaks, a podcast brought to you by Chintan Research Foundation. Here, we will explore the ideas, debates, and decisions shaping the future of India and the world. We will dive deeper into the critical issues of our times, from policy and geopolitics to society, economy, and culture. I am Nandini Bhatnagar. I'm a research analyst at Chintan Research Foundation, and I'm thrilled to have Dr. Monish Tourangbam with us.
Thank you, Nandini. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Dr. Monish is a senior research consultant at CRF, and today he is joining us to talk about the 46th ASEAN Summit in the context of broader Indo Pacific dynamics. The 46th edition of the ASEAN Summit was hosted by Malaysia on the 26th and 27th of May. The summit brought together leaders from Southeast Asian nations to discuss key regional issues such as the civil conflict in Myanmar, the current maritime issues in South China Sea, and the recent US tariff hikes. Dr. Monish, you have recently written about the shifting power dynamics in Indo-Pacific, especially under Trump's second term. Before we dive into the details of your very well-written op-ed, let me ask you this. What led you to focus on these developments right now? And maybe in simpler words, why did you write this opinion piece?
Thank you, Nandini. Thank you for the question. I think the very reason of writing this op-ed for Chintan Research Foundation, lies in the title itself. Because the title says, "Is Indo-Pacific lost in transition?" So there is Indo-Pacific, and there is the word called transition. So it will be an understatement to say at this point of time that the world is really in transition. There is a global churn everywhere. You open the newspapers, you open any news channels in the morning, whether it's coming from Washington, or whether it's coming from Brussels, or whether it's coming from many of the Asian countries. There is a shift happening in the world, in the economic sense, in the security sense, in the diplomatic sense, and also the new era of new technologies, which is really reshaping the way we look at the way we live our lives, but also in terms of how we look at how countries compete, cooperate, and also confront at times, right? So I think there has been a murmur, especially among the ASEAN countries, and that's why the context is the 46th summit of the ASEAN. Despite the kind of initiation that was given to the Quad during Trump 1.0, and also very early on in Trump 2.0, they had the Quad foreign ministers meeting right after his inauguration. And not to forget that it was Trump during his first term that rechristened the Pacific Command as the Indo-Pacific Command. So it is not to say that the Trump administration in the first term did not give any importance to the Indo-Pacific. But I believe that right now, the Ukraine war and Trump's ambition of brokering peace between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul, and the kind of, let's say, the volatile inferno that West Asia is embroiled in terms of the continuity of the Israel-Hamas wars. And also very recently, when he went on his Persian Gulf tour, he reached out to the new Syrian leader who was an Al-Qaeda affiliate. So I think, from the times of the global war on terrorism, 20 years in Afghanistan, to the Asia rebalancing strategy, and now to the Indo-Pacific, the US foreign policy itself has shifted a lot. But there is a driving sense among the ASEAN member countries that ASEAN centrality perhaps is not getting the kind of significance and importance that they were expecting in Trump 2.0, that perhaps the Trump 2.0 administration is too engaged in the transatlantic seasons and ships, and also in the battlegrounds of West Asia. That is one of the first reasons why it came to my mind that I should sort of deep dive into whether Indo-Pacific is still important for America, or whether it is fast losing its relevance in the midst of this global transition that we are seeing.
Right. You were talking about the significance of ASEAN for Trump, and in your piece also you highlight that the 46th ASEAN Summit is particularly significant compared to the previous summits. Could you help us understand what makes this year's summit stand out, and why should the world be paying more closer attention to it?
Thank you. You know, all ASEAN summits are important, but nevertheless, I think it is the geopolitical and the geo-economic context in which this summit is happening, which really makes this summit important. Uh, Perhaps, of course, from the ASEAN point of view, but also from a lot of other countries which engage with the ASEAN, right? Uh, I mean, ever since the Indo-Pacific, let's say, in the Indo-Pacific construct gain importance in international affairs, ASEAN centrality has been like the framework of the Indo-Pacific engagements from the American side, even from the Indian side. Of course, the Chinese government has not really accepted the Indo-Pacific construct. They still continue to call it Asia-Pacific. Um, so I think if we talk of Indo-Pacific, ASEAN centrality, the adherence to ASEAN centrality, and what it really means for the ASEAN member countries, and also a lot of those countries which engage with the ASEAN in a security and economic sense. So when you look at this ASEAN centrality, for some time, as I said in my previous response, some of the ASEAN member countries have expressed some concerns about whether even the initiation of things like AUKUS, for instance, right, even Quad to some extent, whether that is really eating into the relevance of the ASEAN centrality. I've often heard ASEAN scholars talking about this. So I think one is that the continuity of that lurking fear among the ASEAN member countries of one, losing relevance. Two, I think the challenge of not to get caught in a great power competition between US and China, uh, not being forced to choose side between US and China. I think that really lies at the heart of how they really want to practice ASEAN centrality, because a lot of countries in the ASEAN region would say that they want to practice what they term as bamboo diplomacy. That a bamboo tree sort of like is able to sway and withstand the shifting winds, right? The blowing winds. So in that same way, they would like to maintain flexibility so that they are not bogged down in this great power competition. I think why this 46th summit is important is because this ability of the ASEAN countries to build, to practice autonomy, to practice some kind of flexibility in their foreign policy is being tested the most, around these times, with tariff policies being imposed on a lot of ASEAN countries from the Trump administration. Uh, the the economic Cold War between US and China also sort of heightening up in some sense, and that sort of affecting the regional value chains to a large extent. How they are going to handle the repercussions of this economic Cold War, trade war between the two largest economies of the world, which are equally important for them. Right. US is a very important security partner for all the ASEAN countries. Definitely for some of them, like the Philippines, for instance, which has been engaged in a lot of maritime clashes in the South China Sea, for Vietnam, for instance, right? Thailand is a very important partner. But all of these countries also want to exercise that flexibility because China remains their most important economic partner, regional economic partner also. They are all part of the regional comprehensive economic partnership, which is a China-led economic architecture in the region. So I think, this summit is important because it transpires at a time of shifting, tariff policies, transpires at a time when the security guarantees from the American side is being increasingly questioned, transpires at a time when in the in the retrenchment of American leadership, there's a lot of question about whether it leaves strategic space for China to fill. So the Chinese are also, in their playing their own game of, let's say, wooing the ASEAN countries, which are their neighboring countries. Last but not the least, one thing to note for India also is that this ASEAN summit also saw the first trilateral meeting between the GCC countries and China and the ASEAN countries. What kind of economic repercussions this trilateral summit is going to have? I mean, it's still far-fetched. It's the first meeting, but there's no harm in a country in the strategic community in India looking at it and at least reading the tea lips of how this is going to pan out.
Right. I'm so happy that you brought US and China. I'll get to China in a bit, but this leads to the broader question. How would you locate Indo-Pacific in Trump 2.0, and what's different this time around compared to his first term? I know you've already talked about it a bit, but what are the signals that we're getting from the White House about America's evolving engagement with the region? Just a little bit on that.
I think, well, the first thing is Trump's first foreign visit was to the Persian Gulf and not to the Indo-Pacific region, which, according to the American strategy, has been the region of priority for the Americans, right? That doesn't really mean that Indo-Pacific has lost relevance in the Trump 2.0. I'm not saying that. We are just, let's say, probing into the signals that are emitting from this new administration, that what is it going to really look like? It's a little ambiguous at this point of time. We did have the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, traveling in the Indo-Pacific very recently. We also had the intelligence czar Tulsi Gabbard coming to some of the Indo-Pacific countries, including in India. So high-level visits have been there. But the real question is really about the presidential focus. Right. U.S. always will have its capability presence in the Indo-Pacific region, right? It has always had. But the question always is about the policy focus, the policy presence. Now, the policy presence and focus often comes from presidential presence and focus, right? That's why, there's a lot of, let's say, chatter in the ASEAN countries about Trump's visit to ASEAN. For instance, the US was not present even on the sidelines of the ASEAN Summit. And the US was conspicuous by absence, in the sense that even if not present, the shadow of the Trump administration looms large in every multilateral summit, in the sense that by omission and by commission, whatever US does is going to have an impact on the region. So I think, as I alluded to in the beginning, there's a lot of steps that the Trump 1.0 took in terms of really bringing Indo-Pacific into the center of US grand strategy and into the center of global geopolitical debates, right? But looking at the first 100 days of the Trump administration, the one thing that often interests me sometimes is that Trump has somehow done so many things in the first 100 days, has changed so many things, that somehow we feel that he has been there for a very long time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you look at it, his second administration started only in January, right? So I think things are still playing out, right, in the Indo-Pacific region. It's not surprising for the ASEAN members to try and, let's say, garner attention from the American administration that you're not doing enough or there's not enough focus. That's not surprising. That's going to happen, because I think the whole idea of ASEAN centrality, or the, let's say, the efficacy of the ASEAN diplomacy also pans out in terms of how best they're able to sort of like navigate great power politics and make sure that things work out for them, right? So I think what is really different in Trump 2.0 is that there are many domestic and many international issues which are in the direct radar screen of the Trump administration. And it seems that at least in Trump's radar screen, Indo-Pacific doesn't seem to be appearing till now. And that is exactly why there are a lot of chatters about whether the Indo-Pacific is losing relevance or not. And that's exactly why I intend to sort of probe further into this as things evolve.
Right. I mean, as per my understanding, America seems to be recalibrating. So while it's doing that, China has been busy. What is Beijing up to right now, and especially with the initiatives like the Global Development Initiative and its renewed focus on maybe neighborhood diplomacy? How is China trying to reshape its role in the Indo-Pacific, if at all, and what's at stake for the region?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think a complex one also in terms of the fact that it's really dynamic. The way things are playing out. Not only in the region, um, a lot of the ramifications of the Trump administration policies, um, is playing out in terms of how other countries are responding to it, right? How they are trying to make the most out of the ships that we are seeing, right? And different countries have different capabilities, right? The way China responds to this ship is never going to be, uh, you know, like similar to, let's say, the way uh, Vietnam responds to this ship, right? So the scale of the economy, the nature of the relationship between U.S. and China, that's vastly different from many other bilateral relationships. Perhaps this is one of the most consequential relationships in the world, in the sense that whatever happens between US and China is going to have direct or indirect effect for all the bilateral relationships and all the multilateral relationships around the world. So I think you start from Europe, for instance. You see that there's a lot of shifts happening in terms of how EU and China is engaging with each other uh, in the midst of the differences that that's cropping up between, let's say, the EU and US, for instance. Likewise, even in the Indo-Pacific region, everyone is engaging the Trump administration in their own ways, right? How to navigate their tariff policies, how to, let's say, negotiate new terms of trade engagement. This is what India is doing with its bilateral trade agreement negotiations. China is engaging in its own way with the Americans in a sort of a tit for tat trade escalation. All the ASEAN countries are trying to protect their own interests. Now, in trying to do that, I think it's also creating a new, let's say, a new framework for how China and ASEAN countries are engaging, or how China and countries in the Indo-Pacific are engaging, right? What kind of a role China would want to play, and how it will play out. That's still in the realm of like evolution, right? You already see the Chinese government paying a lot of importance to how they engage with their neighbors, right? So they already had a meeting regarding, neighboring countries, relationship with China. I think it's also important to point out that the Chinese government has just released a new white paper.
Yes.
And that white paper pays a lot of importance in the linkages that the Chinese government wants to draw between development and security. That the utmost goal is sort of national security, and everything sort of like flows like tributaries into that river, right? So that is how you see it. You did refer to GDI, Global Development Initiative. You also have GSI, Global Security Initiative, and you also have GCI,
Yes.
Global Civilization Initiative. And somehow all of this also sort of aligns again with, let's say the Belt and Road Initiative and all those things. So I think in the realm of development initiative to the global south, or in the realm of new security partnerships with, let's say, smaller countries in the Indo-Pacific, um, the Chinese government is really recalibrating and positioning itself, first of all, as a protector of globalization, which is really interesting, right?
Yeah.
A communist country projecting itself as a protector of globalization at a time when they accuse a capitalist country of being a protectionist country and harming globalization itself. So I feel that the world, in every sense, it it is at a very crucial precipice.
Right.
And from that precipice, whether countries are flying towards greater cooperation, or whether it's going to fall down into further confrontation, is something that we have to wait and watch.
My last question, as you also write in your paper, India faces a unique challenge in this sort of scenario. Given our limited resources compared to the maybe more developed nations, how can India do more with less? And what should India's priorities be as we navigate this very complex situation?
That I think is a great question, because that I feel should be at the top of the mind of all strategic planners in India, and I think it is, right. Um, it goes without saying that India navigates a very difficult neighborhood, right? It goes without saying that India is rising in a turbulent world, right? So I think at the end, what do we really want? We want a Viksit Bharat, right, by 2047. And in order to create or develop towards that Viksit Bharat, move towards that Viksit Bharat goal, we need a conducive external environment, right? So, you know, having a conducive external environment is not totally in our control most of the times, right? So the challenge for India really is like how to rise in a turbulent world, right? Who would be our partners of choice? Both in security, both in economic growth and development. As we navigate, for example, big changes like moving towards green energy transition. This is a big challenge for a developing country like India. Achieving SDG goals, for example, right? Relatively, so there are this, growth-oriented goals which are really, I think, at the top of the pecking order if you look at what is really important for India. But then you also have the paraphernalia, which is dynamic geopolitics, which is volatile world, volatile neighborhood. Now, as you rightly pointed out, right, there is relative capability differences. So what India lacks in capability, we might have to make it up in intent and strategy, right? So I think from now on, it's really going to be about how we maintain our economic growth in the domestic sense, and how much we are able to sort of shape the external environment that will sort of support that domestic growth that we are aiming at, right? And I think in that, partnerships are really important. Now, it's not easy to create and maintain partnerships in difficult times. So I think, how do we diversify our partnerships? How do we forge partnerships, let's say, with like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific, for instance, even as we see shifts in Washington's policies? What are our ties with Japan? How are they moving ahead with Australia? We are reaching out to the Gulf countries. We have a strong partnership with the ASEAN countries. It's about how you recalibrate those regional economic frameworks in the face of global economic shifts. We are not part of the regional comprehensive economic partnership. We were part of the Indo-Pacific economic framework. The Trump administration at this point of time, doesn't really seem to be, really moving ahead with IPEF. So if we are not part of RCEF, if the IPEF is not moving in the way it should have moved, I think it's good time for us to think that how do we recalibrate this changing regional economic architecture? How do we force bilateral and regional FTAs, right? Trade agreements, right? And how do we really make sure that as we preserve our own territorial integrity and as we protect our sovereignty and the lives of the Indian citizens from foreign attacks, who are on our side? And if there's an ambiguity about who is on our side, how do we really, prop up our capability, beef up our capability, that when push comes to shove, we can stand on our own.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Monish, for your time. It was truly an enriching experience and a conversation. Thank you also for being our very first guest. Please stay tuned for more such dialogues, and we'll see you in episode 2.
Thank you. Thank you.